Agnes Grey by Bronte. Chapter 15. The Walk. "Oh dear, I wish Hatfield had not been so precipitate," said Rosalie next day at 4 p.m. as, with a portentous yawn, she laid down her worsted work and looked listlessly towards the window. "There's no inducement to go out now, and nothing to look forward to. The days will be so long and dull when there are no parties to enliven them, and there are none this week, or next either, that I know of." "Pity you were so cross to him," observed Matilda, to whom this lamentation was addressed. "He'll never come again, and I suspect you liked him after all. I hoped you would have taken him for your beau, and left dear Harry to me." "Humph! My beau must be Agnes indeed, Matilda, the admired of all beholders, if I am to be contented with him alone. I'm sorry to lose Hatfield, I confess, but the first decent man or number of men that come to supply his place will be more than welcome. It's Sunday tomorrow. I do wonder how he'll look, and whether he'll be able to go through the service. Most likely he'll pretend he's got a cold, and make Mr. Weston do it all." "Not he!" exclaimed Matilda, somewhat contemptuously. "Fool as he is, he's not so soft as that comes to." Her sister was slightly offended, but the event proved Matilda was right. The disappointed lover performed his pastoral duties as usual. Rosalie, indeed, affirmed he looked very pale and dejected. He might be a little paler, but the difference, if any, was scarcely perceptible. As for his dejection, I certainly did not hear his laugh ringing from the vestry as usual, nor his voice loud in hilarious discourse, though I did hear it uplifted in rating the sexton in a manner that made the congregation stare, and in his transits to and from the pulpit and the communion table there was more of solemn pomp, and less of that irreverent, self-confident, or rather self-delighted imperiousness with which he usually swept along, that air that seemed to say, "You all reverence and adore me, I know, but if anyone does not, I defy him to the teeth." But the most remarkable change was, that he never once suffered his eyes to wander in the direction of Mr. Murray's pew, and did not leave the church till we were gone. Mr. Hatfield had doubtless received a very severe blow, but his pride impelled him to use every effort to conceal the effects of it. He had been disappointed in his certain hope of obtaining not only a beautiful and, to him, highly attractive wife, but one whose rank and fortune might give brilliance to far inferior charms. He was likewise, no doubt, intensely mortified by his repulse, and deeply offended at the conduct of Miss Murray throughout. It would have given him no little consolation to have known how disappointed she was to find him apparently so little moved, and to see that he was able to refrain from casting a single glance at her throughout both services, though she declared it showed he was thinking of her all the time, or his eyes would have fallen upon her if it were only by chance, but if they had so chanced to fall, she would have affirmed it was because they could not resist the attraction. It might have pleased him too, in some degree, to have seen how dull and dissatisfied she was throughout that week, the greater part of it at least, for lack of her usual source of excitement, and how often she regretted having used him up so soon, like a child that, having devoured its plum-cake too hastily, sits sucking its fingers, and vainly lamenting its greediness. At length I was called upon one fine morning to accompany her in a walk to the village. Ostensibly she went to get some shades of Berlin wool at a tolerably respectable shop that was chiefly supported by the ladies of the vicinity. Really, I trust there is no breach of charity in supposing that she went with the idea of meeting either with the rector himself, or some other admirer by the way, for as we went along, she kept wondering what Hatfield would do or say if we met him, etc., etc. As we passed Mr. Green's park gates, she wondered whether he was at home. Great stupid blockhead! As Lady Meltham's carriage passed us, she wondered what Mr. Harry was doing this fine day, and then began to abuse his elder brother for being such a fool as to get married and go and live in London. "Why," said I thought you wanted to live in London yourself." "Yes, because it's so dull here. But then he makes it still duller by taking himself off, and if he were not married, I might have him instead of that odious Sir Thomas." Then, observing the prints of a horse's feet on the somewhat miry road, she wondered whether it was a gentleman's horse, and finally concluded it was, for the impressions were too small to have been made by a great clumsy cart-horse. And then she wondered who the rider could be, and whether we should meet him coming back, for she was sure he had only passed that morning. And lastly, when we entered the village and saw only a few of its humble inhabitants moving about, she wondered why the stupid people couldn't keep in their houses. She was sure she didn't want to see their ugly faces and dirty vulgar clothes. It wasn't for that she came to Horton. Amid all this, I confess, I wondered too, in secret, whether we should meet or catch a glimpse of somebody else, and as we passed his lodgings, I even went so far as to wonder whether he was at the window. On entering the shop, Miss Murray desired me to stand in the doorway while she transacted her business, and tell her if anyone passed. But, alas, there was no one visible besides the villagers, except Jane and Susan Green, coming down the single street, apparently returning from a walk. "Stupid things," muttered she, as she came out after having concluded her bargain. "Why couldn't they have their dolt of a brother with them? Even he would be better than nothing." She greeted them, however, with a cheerful smile, and protestations of pleasure at the happy meeting equal to their own. They placed themselves one on each side of her, and all three walked away chatting and laughing as young ladies do when they get together, if they be but on tolerable intimate terms. But I, feeling myself to be one too many, left them to their merriment and lagged behind, as usual on such occasions. I had no relish for walking beside Miss Green or Miss Susan, like one deaf and dumb, who could neither speak nor be spoken to. But this time I was not alone. It struck me first as very odd, that just as I was thinking about Mr. Weston, he should come up and accost me. But afterwards, on due reflection, I thought there was nothing odd about it, unless it were the fact of his speaking to me, for on such a morning, and so near his own abode, it was natural enough that he should be about, and as for my thinking of him, I had been doing that, with little intermission, ever since we set out on our journey, so there was nothing remarkable in that.